Blackwells Courage. Lady Cecily of Ravensshire had spent years avoiding Sir Nicholas Warwick, the king's most feared enforcer. But when he found her alone in the moonlit corridors, his grip firm around her wrist, she knew her time had run out. "You have been meddling in dangerous things, Cecily," he murmured. "Now I decide what happens next." Chapter 1. The Falcon's Shadow. The wind, a restless spirit, howled through the battlements of Ravensshire Castle, carrying with it the scent of rain and the distant murmur of the sea. Lady Cecily of Ravensshire stood at the highest window of the West Tower, her gaze lost in the swirling grey tapestry of the approaching storm. Below, the courtyard was a hive of controlled chaos, men at arms preparing for the king's imminent arrival. Their movements, the clang of steel, the snorting of horses, were all muted by the thick stone walls, yet they vibrated through Cecily's very bones, a constant, unsettling tremor. She was 42, a woman past the first blush of youth, yet still possessed of a striking, if somewhat severe, beauty. Her hair, the color of raven's wings streaked with threads of silver, was bound tightly in a braid that reached her waist. Her eyes, a deep, unsettling gray, held the weight of years of carefully guarded secrets and unspoken grief. The fine lines etched around them spoke not of weakness, but of a resilience forged in the crucible of loss and betrayal. Her gown, a deep forest green, was simple but exquisitely crafted, the only adornment a silver falcon pendant, the emblem of her house, resting against her breast. The falcon, once a symbol of pride, now felt like a cage. Cecily's fingers tightened around the cold stone of the window ledge. The king's visit, ostensibly a gesture of goodwill to a loyal vassal, felt more like a tightening of the noose. King Alaric was a man who collected debts, both real and imagined, and Cecily knew she owed him a debt she could never repay. Or, perhaps, a debt she refused to repay. Her late husband, Lord Edmund of Ravensshire, had been a man of unwavering loyalty to the crown, a loyalty that had ultimately cost him his life on a distant battlefield, fighting a war that had gained them nothing but sorrow. Cecily had mourned him, truly, but her grief had been laced with a bitter resentment, a sense that Edmund had sacrificed himself for a cause that had valued his life less than his obedience. And now, the king came to collect. Not gold, not land, but something far more precious. Information. Information that Cecily possessed. Information that could shake the very foundations of the kingdom. Information she had sworn to protect, even from the king himself. A soft knock on the chamber door startled her. "My lady?" It was Alara, her lady-in-waiting, her voice hesitant, laced with a familiar anxiety. Alara, barely 20, with wide, innocent eyes and a heart too soft for the harsh realities of court life, was Cecily's only confidant, the only person who saw past the carefully constructed facade of the Lady of Ravensshire. "Come in, Alara," Cecily said, turning from the window, forcing a semblance of calm onto her features. Alara entered, her cheeks flushed, her hands twisting the folds of her simple wool gown. "The king's vanguard has been sighted, my lady. They will be here within the hour." Cecily nodded, her gaze drifting back to the storm gathering on the horizon. "Then we must be ready to greet them." "My lady," Alara began, her voice barely a whisper. Are you afraid?" Cecily looked at the young woman, at the fear mirrored in her eyes, and felt a pang of guilt. She had drawn Alara into this dangerous game, burdened her with secrets she should never have had to bear. "Fear is a luxury we cannot afford, Alara," she said softly. "We must be strong. For Ravensshire. For ourselves." But even as she spoke the words, Cecily felt the cold grip of fear tightening around her own heart. She knew that the king's arrival heralded not just a visit, but a reckoning. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that one man, in particular, would be the instrument of that reckoning. Sir Nicholas Warwick, the king's falcon, his enforcer, his hidden blade. The mere thought of his name sent a shiver down her spine. He was a legend whispered in hushed tones throughout the kingdom, a warrior of unparalleled skill and ruthlessness, a man who carried out the king's will without question, without mercy. He was said to be as cold and unyielding as the steel he wielded, his heart untouched by compassion or remorse. Cecily had met him only once, years ago, at a tournament held in the king's honor. She had been a young bride then, full of naive hopes and dreams. He had been a rising star in the king's court, his reputation already preceding him. She remembered the way he had looked at her, his eyes, the color of polished obsidian, assessing, calculating, stripping away her carefully constructed composure with a single glance. She had felt exposed, vulnerable, as if he could see straight through to the secrets she guarded so fiercely. She had avoided him ever since, carefully maneuvering through the treacherous currents of court life, always staying one step ahead of the king's falcon. But now he was coming to Ravensshire, and she knew, with a sickening certainty, that her time had run out. The storm broke as the first riders of the king's vanguard entered the courtyard. Rain lashed against the castle walls, the wind screamed like a banshee, and the torches flickered wildly, casting long, dancing shadows. Cecily stood at the head of the stairs, her back straight, her chin lifted, her expression carefully neutral. She would meet the king and his falcon, with the dignity and defiance befitting the lady of Ravensshire. But beneath the surface, her heart pounded like a trapped bird, and a single, terrifying thought echoed in her mind. He is here. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Stone Hall. The great hall of Ravensshire, usually a place of warmth and boisterous feasting, felt cold and cavernous under the king's scrutiny. Torches blazed in their sconces, casting flickering light on the tapestries depicting scenes of Ravenshire's long and storied history, but they did little to dispel the chill that had settled over the room. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, roasted meat, and a subtle, underlying tension that made Cecily's skin prickle. King Alaric, a man in his late 50s, with a face etched with the lines of power and a gaze that could pierce steel, sat at the high table, his presence dominating the room. He was flanked by his advisors and knights, a formidable display of royal authority. Cecily sat to his right, her position a mark of her status, but also a subtle reminder of her vulnerability. To the king's left sat Sir Nicholas Warwick. He was even more imposing than Cecily remembered. Taller than most men, with a build honed by years of warfare, he radiated an aura of contained power. His hair, the color of dark oak, was cut short, revealing a strong jawline and a face that seemed carved from granite. His eyes, those unsettling obsidian eyes, were fixed on Cecily, their intensity unwavering. He wore a dark, unadorned tunic, the only indication of his rank a silver wolf's head pendant, the symbol of the king's personal guard, resting on his chest. The feast was a lavish affair, a display of Ravenshire's wealth and hospitality, but Cecily found it difficult to swallow. The food tasted like ashes in her mouth, the wine like vinegar. Every glance from the king, every subtle shift in Sir Nicholas's posture, sent a jolt of anxiety through her. She felt like a hunted animal, cornered and waiting for the inevitable strike. The conversation around the table was polite, even cordial, but Cecily knew it was all a carefully choreographed dance, a prelude to the real purpose of the king's visit. There were veiled inquiries about the state of Ravenshire's defenses, subtle probes about her loyalty, and thinly disguised threats veiled as compliments. Ravensshire has always been a staunch supporter of the crown, the king said, his voice booming across the hall. Your late husband, Lord Edmund, was a shining example of loyalty and service. Cecily inclined her head, her expression carefully neutral. Lord Edmund was a loyal subject, Your Majesty. Indeed, the king continued, his gaze sharpening. And I trust that his loyalty lives on in his widow. Ravenshire's loyalty is unwavering, Your Majesty, Cecily replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. Sir Nicholas remained silent, his eyes still fixed on Cecily, his expression unreadable. He was like a predator watching its prey, waiting for the opportune moment to pounce. Later, as the feast drew to a close and the guests began to disperse, Cecily found herself alone with Sir Nicholas in a dimly lit alcove near the entrance to the hall. He had moved with a swiftness that belied his size, blocking her path with a subtle, yet unmistakable, gesture. "Lady Cecily," he said, his voice low and resonant, a stark contrast to the boisterous noise of the hall. "We have matters to discuss." Cecily met his gaze, her chin lifting in defiance. "I am at your disposal, Sir Nicholas." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes seeming to penetrate her very soul. "You have been uncooperative, Lady Cecily, withholding information that is vital to the security of the realm." "I have done nothing to betray the crown," Cecily replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Perhaps not intentionally," he conceded, his gaze unwavering. "But your silence speaks volumes. You know something, Lady Cecily. Something you are afraid to reveal." Cecily's heart pounded against her ribs. He was too close, his presence overwhelming. She could smell the faint scent of leather and steel emanating from him, a scent that spoke of danger and power. "I have nothing to say to you, Sir Nicholas," she said, forcing herself to maintain a semblance of composure. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her, engulfing her in darkness. "The king is not a patient man, Lady Cecily. He demands answers, and I am tasked with obtaining them, one way or another." Cecily felt a shiver of fear run down her spine, but she refused to show it. She had faced down enemies before, both on the battlefield and in the court. She would not be intimidated by this man, no matter how powerful he was. "I have sworn an oath," she said, her voice low and steady. "An oath to protect a secret that could destroy everything." "Loyalty is a commendable virtue, Lady Cecily," Sir Nicholas said, his voice softening slightly. "But loyalty to whom? To a dead man? To a lost cause? Or to the realm? To the king who protects you?" His words struck a chord, resonating with the doubts that had plagued her for years. Had she been foolish to cling to the secret? Was she endangering Ravensshire, her people, for the sake of a promise made to a dying man? She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception, any hint of cruelty. But she saw only a cold, unwavering determination, and something else, something she couldn't quite decipher. A flicker of understanding? "I do not know what to do," she confessed, the words barely a whisper. He reached out, his hand hovering near her arm, but not quite touching her. "Tell me," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Tell me the secret, Lady Cecily, and I will help you. I will protect you." His words were like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. But Cecily hesitated. Could she trust him? Could she trust the king's falcon, the man known for his ruthlessness and unwavering loyalty to the crown? The decision she made in that moment, in the dimly lit alcove of the great hall, would change the course of her life forever. The whispers in the stone hall carried more weight than any shouted decree. Chapter 3. The King's Decree. The morning after the feast dawned gray and bleak, mirroring the turmoil in Cecily's heart. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape washed clean and raw, but the air remained heavy with unspoken tension. She had slept little, tossing and turning in her bed, haunted by Sir Nicholas's words, by the choice she had made, by the potential consequences of her actions. She had agreed to meet him, alone, in the castle chapel at dawn. A place of sanctuary, a place of confession, a place where she hoped to find some measure of peace, some guidance in the darkness that surrounded her. The chapel was small and intimate, lit only by the flickering light of a few candles and the pale gray light filtering through the stained glass windows. The air was cool and still, scented with incense and the faint, lingering smell of beeswax. Cecily knelt at the altar, her hands clasped tightly in prayer, but her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She heard the soft tread of footsteps behind her, and her heart leaped into her throat. She knew, without turning, that it was him. Sir Nicholas stood at the entrance to the chapel, his silhouette framed against the faint light. He was dressed in simple, dark clothing, his sword absent, his demeanor less imposing than it had been the previous night. He looked almost vulnerable. He approached her slowly, his footsteps echoing softly on the stone floor. He knelt beside her, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the warmth emanating from his body. "You came," he said, his voice low and gentle. Cecily nodded, unable to speak. "You are troubled, Lady Cecily," he observed, his gaze searching her face. "I see it in your eyes." She looked at him, her defenses crumbling under his scrutiny. "I am afraid," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "Afraid of what I must do. Afraid of what will happen if I do not." He reached out, his hand covering hers, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me the secret, and I will help you bear the burden." His touch sent a jolt of warmth through her, a warmth that surprised her, that unsettled her. She had expected coldness, detachment, but she found instead a surprising tenderness, a hint of compassion that she had not thought possible in this man. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to reveal. "It concerns the king's brother," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Lord Robert. He did not die of a fever, as the official accounts claim. He was murdered." Sir Nicholas's hand tightened around hers, but he remained silent, his eyes fixed on hers, encouraging her to continue. "My husband, Lord Edmund, discovered the truth," Cecily continued. "He found evidence that implicated someone very close to the king. Someone powerful. Someone who would stop at nothing to protect their secret." "And who is this person?" Sir Nicholas asked, his voice low and intense. Cecily hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment of truth, the moment where she would either save herself or condemn herself. "It was Queen Isolde," she whispered, the name barely audible. Sir Nicholas's eyes widened slightly, but he did not express surprise. He had suspected, perhaps, or he had learned to mask his emotions so completely that they were impossible to read. "The Queen," he repeated, his voice flat.
"Why?"
Lord Robert had discovered her affair with Lord Valerius, a nobleman from a rival kingdom, Cecily explained. He threatened to expose her, to reveal her treason to the king. She had him silenced.
"Permanently."
"And your husband, he knew this?" Cecily nodded. "He found a letter, hidden in Lord Robert's chambers. A letter from Queen Isolde to Lord Valerius, outlining their plans, their betrayal." "And where is this letter now?" Sir Nicholas asked, his voice sharp. "I have it," Cecily said.
"Hidden.
"Safe. You understand the danger you are in, Lady Cecily," he said, his gaze unwavering. "If the Queen discovers that you possess this evidence, she will not hesitate to eliminate you, as she did her brother-in-law." Cecily nodded, her throat tight with fear. "I know. Then you must give me the letter," he said. "I will take it to the king. I will ensure that justice is served." Cecily hesitated. Could she trust him? Could she trust him with her life, with the fate of Ravensshire? She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception, any hint of betrayal. But she saw only a fierce determination, a burning desire to protect her, to see justice done. I trust you," she said, the word surprising even herself. A flicker of something that might have been relief crossed his face. "You will not regret this, Lady Cecily," he said. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. "Take me to the letter," he said. "We must act quickly." As they left the chapel, a messenger arrived, breathless and urgent. "Sir Nicholas," he gasped, "a decree from the king. He demands Lady Cecily's presence at court. Immediately." The king's decree hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Chapter 4. A Midnight Summons. The journey to the king's court was a blur of hurried preparations and anxious whispers. Cecily, accompanied by Alara and a small contingent of Ravensshire guards, traveled with a sense of mounting dread. The king's sudden summons, delivered with such urgency, could only mean one thing. He knew. Somehow, he had learned of her knowledge, of her possession of the damning letter. Sir Nicholas rode beside her carriage, his presence a constant, reassuring weight. He had said little since their meeting in the chapel, but his eyes, when they met hers, held a silent promise of protection. Yet, Even his formidable presence could not entirely quell the fear that gnawed at her insides. The king's court was a sprawling complex of palaces, gardens, and courtyards, a labyrinth of power and intrigue. Cecily had always felt a sense of unease within its walls, a feeling of being watched, judged, manipulated. Now that feeling was amplified tenfold. They arrived late in the evening, the sky a dark, starless expanse above them. The palace was ablaze with light, torches flickering in the wind, casting long, dancing shadows. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, perfume, and the underlying tension that always permeated the king's court. Cecily was ushered into a small, private antechamber, her guards dismissed, Alara left trembling in the hallway. She was alone, facing the inevitable confrontation with the king. King Alaric was waiting for her, seated in a high-backed chair, his face illuminated by the flickering light of a single candle. He looked older than she remembered, his features etched with weariness and a hint of sadness. "Lady Cecily," he said, his voice low and resonant. "You have kept me waiting." Cecily bowed her head, her heart pounding in her chest. "I came as quickly as I could, Your Majesty." "Indeed," he said, his gaze sharpening. "And yet, you have been keeping something from me, haven't you? Something of great importance." Cecily's breath caught in her throat. There was no point in denying it. He knew. I have," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "The letter," he said, his voice flat. "The letter concerning my late brother, Lord Robert. You possess it, do you not?" Cecily nodded, her hands trembling. "And you have shown it to Sir Nicholas," he continued, his gaze unwavering. Cecily's eyes widened in surprise. How had he known? Had Sir Nicholas betrayed her? "He told you?" she stammered. The king gave a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "Sir Nicholas is my most loyal servant, Lady Cecily. He would never betray me. He informed me of your discovery, of your willingness to cooperate." Cecily felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed by a surge of anger. He had been testing her, manipulating her, playing a dangerous game with her life.
"Why?"
she asked, her voice trembling with indignation. "Why did you summon me here? Why did you not simply send Sir Nicholas to take the letter?" The king sighed, his gaze softening slightly. "Because, Lady Cecily," he said, "I wanted to hear the truth from your own lips. I wanted to see if you had the courage to face me, to admit your knowledge of this terrible affair." "And what now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Now," he said, his voice hardening, "you will give me the letter. And you will tell me everything you know. Every detail. Every name. Every whisper." Cecily's heart sank. She had hoped, foolishly, that she might be spared, that her cooperation might earn her some measure of leniency. But she knew now that there would be no mercy. The king would have his answers, and he would exact his revenge. "I will tell you everything," she said, her voice resigned. "But I ask one thing in return." "And what is that?" the king asked, his eyebrows raised.
"Protection," she said.
"Protection for myself, for my people, for Ravensshire, from the queen's wrath." The king studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You have my word, Lady Cecily," he said finally. "As long as you cooperate fully, you and your people will be safe." His words offered a small measure of comfort, but Cecily knew that the king's word was not always a guarantee. She had entered a dangerous game, and she could only hope that she had made the right choices, that she had placed her trust in the right man. She was led to a small, windowless room, lit only by a single torch. A table and 2 chairs were the only furnishings. Sir Nicholas was waiting for her. "The king has given me leave to question you," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Tell me everything." As the clock struck midnight, a summons came, not from the king, but a whispered message from a shadowy figure in the corridor. It was for Sir Nicholas. He glanced at Cecily, a question in his eyes, then disappeared into the darkness, leaving her alone, under the watch of a silent, unblinking guard. The midnight summons hung heavy, the unknown threat twisting in the air. Chapter 5. The Price of Silence. Hours stretched into an eternity. Cecily sat alone in the stark chamber, the silence broken only by the occasional muffled sounds from beyond the thick wooden door and the frantic beat of her own heart. The torch sputtered, casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the stone walls, each flicker a stark reminder of her isolation. Sir Nicholas's sudden departure had left her adrift, the fragile sense of security he had offered shattered by the unknown summons. Had he been recalled by the king? Had the queen discovered their collaboration? Or was this something else entirely, something even more sinister? The questions gnawed at her, feeding her growing anxiety. She replayed their conversation in the chapel, searching for any hint of deception, any sign that she had misjudged him. But she found none. His eyes, his touch, his words, they had all seemed genuine. Yet, in this viper's nest of courtly intrigue, truth was a slippery eel, impossible to grasp. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the door creaked open, and Sir Nicholas returned. His face was pale, his expression grim. He carried a weariness that seemed to go beyond mere physical exhaustion. "What happened?" Cecily asked, her voice trembling. "Where did you go?" He closed the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment, as if gathering his strength. "The king," he said, his voice low and strained. He has made a decision." Cecily's heart sank. "About the queen?" He nodded slowly. "He believes your account. He believes the evidence." A flicker of hope ignited within her. Then he will act? He will bring her to justice? Sir Nicholas hesitated, his gaze avoiding hers. "He will deal with the matter."
In his own way.
Cecily frowned. "What does that mean?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture of weariness that surprised her. "It means," he said, his voice heavy with unspoken meaning, "that the king will not publicly accuse the queen. He will not risk the scandal, the instability it would cause. He will silence her. Quietly, discreetly." Cecily's blood ran cold. He will have her killed? Sir Nicholas met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resignation. "He will ensure that she is no longer a threat."
To him. To the realm.
Cecily felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She had known that the stakes were high, that the consequences of her actions would be severe. But she had not anticipated this. She had become an instrument of death, a pawn in the king's deadly game. And what of me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What of Ravensshire?" "The king has given his word," Sir Nicholas said. "You are under his protection. As long as you remain silent. As long as you never speak of this to anyone." The price of silence. It was a heavy price, a burden she would have to carry for the rest of her life. She had traded one secret for another, one danger for another. "And the letter?" she asked. "The king has it," Sir Nicholas replied. "It will be destroyed, along with any other evidence." Cecily nodded, her mind numb. She had played her part, and now she was being dismissed, cast aside like a used tool. "You may return to Ravensshire," Sir Nicholas said. "The king has ordered a full escort. You will be safe." Safe. The word felt hollow, meaningless. She would never be truly safe, not as long as she carried this secret within her. As she prepared to leave, Sir Nicholas stopped her, his hand on her arm, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Cecily," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I know this is not what you wanted. I know this is not justice. But it is the best we could hope for. Under the circumstances." She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of remorse, any hint of regret. But she saw only a weary acceptance, a resignation to the harsh realities of power. "I understand," she said, her voice flat. He released her arm, his gaze lingering on hers for a moment longer. "You are a strong woman, Cecily of Ravensshire," he said. "Stronger than you know." His words offered a small measure of comfort, a flicker of warmth in the cold darkness that surrounded her. But as she rode away from the king's court, under the watchful eyes of her escort, she knew that her life had been irrevocably changed. She had entered a world of shadows and secrets, and she would never truly escape its grasp. The price of silence had been paid. But at what cost to her soul? The question lingered, unanswered, a haunting echo in the pre-dawn air. Chapter 6. Beneath the Raven's Wing. The return to Ravensshire was a stark contrast to the hurried journey to court. The urgency was gone, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Cecily felt the weight of her secret pressing down on her, isolating her from Alara, from her guards, from the very land she ruled. The familiar landscape, once a source of comfort, now seemed to mock her, its beauty a painful reminder of the innocence she had lost. Ravensshire Castle, usually a haven, felt like a prison. The stone walls, once a symbol of strength and security, now seemed to confine her, to trap her within the web of lies and deceit she had woven. She wandered through the familiar halls and chambers, feeling like a ghost, a stranger in her own home. Alara, sensing her mistress's distress, tried her best to offer comfort, but Cecily found it difficult to respond. The words of reassurance, the gentle touch, seemed to bounce off her, unable to penetrate the wall of grief and guilt that surrounded her. She spent hours in the castle chapel, kneeling before the altar, seeking solace in prayer, but finding only emptiness. The familiar rituals, the comforting words, offered no relief, no escape from the darkness that had settled over her soul. She tried to resume her duties, to oversee the running of the estate, to attend to the needs of her people, but her heart was not in it. She found herself going through the motions, her mind elsewhere, lost in a labyrinth of regret and fear. The nights were the worst. Sleep offered no escape, only a descent into a world of nightmares, of shadowy figures and whispered threats, of the king's cold gaze and the queen's lifeless eyes. She would wake up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, her body trembling, the taste of fear bitter on her tongue. One evening, as she sat alone in her chamber, staring out at the darkening landscape, she heard a soft knock on the door. It was Alara, her face etched with concern. "My lady," she said hesitantly, "there is a visitor. He insists on seeing you." Cecily frowned. "Who is it?" Alara hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "He would not give his name, my lady. But he wears the wolf's head pendant." Cecily's heart leaped into her throat. Sir Nicholas. He had come to Ravensshire.
But why?
She steeled herself, smoothing her gown, trying to regain some semblance of composure. "Show him in," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Alara opened the door, and Sir Nicholas entered. He was dressed in traveling clothes, his face weary, his expression unreadable. He looked different. Less imposing, more human. He bowed his head. "Lady Cecily." "Sir Nicholas," she replied, her voice cool. "What brings you to Ravensshire?" He hesitated, his gaze searching her face. I needed to see you," he said, his voice low. To make sure you were well." Cecily raised an eyebrow, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. "The king sent you? To check on me?" He shook his head.
"No.
This is personal. I came of my own accord." His words surprised her. She had expected him to be the king's emissary, a cold, detached observer, sent to ensure her continued silence. But his presence here, his words, his demeanor, suggested something else entirely. Something unexpected.
"Why?"
she asked, her voice softening slightly. He took a step closer, his gaze holding hers. "Because," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I could not forget you. I could not forget what we had shared, what we had done." His words sent a shiver down her spine, a mixture of fear and something else. Something she had not felt in years. A stirring of desire, a flicker of longing. "You should not be here," she said, her voice trembling. "It is too dangerous." "I know," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "But I had to come. I had to see you. One last time. One last time." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. He was leaving. Leaving the king's service? Leaving the realm? She did not know. But she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she did not want him to go. Beneath the raven's wing, a forbidden connection was acknowledged, a shared burden creating an unlikely bond. A silent plea hung in the air, a request for something neither of them could name, yet both desperately needed. Chapter 7. Scars of the Past. The air in Cecily's chamber crackled with unspoken tension. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating the stark contrast between them. The Lady of Ravenhire, bound by duty and haunted by secrets, and the king's former enforcer, a man who had seemingly shed his armor, both literally and figuratively. "One last time?" Cecily repeated, her voice barely above a whisper, the question hanging heavy in the air. "Where are you going?" Nicholas hesitated, his gaze shifting from her face to the worn stones of the floor, as if searching for the right words, or perhaps the courage to speak them. "I am leaving the king's service," he finally said, his voice low and strained. "I can no longer serve a man who values power over justice." Cecily's eyes widened in surprise. This was not the ruthless, unyielding warrior she had expected. This was a man wrestling with his conscience, a man who had reached a breaking point. "But your oath?" she asked, remembering the unwavering loyalty he had displayed, the dedication to the crown that had seemed absolute. He gave a bitter smile. "An oath can be broken," he said, "just as a heart can be broken,
Just as trust can be shattered."
His words resonated with her own experiences, with the betrayal she had endured, the oaths she had struggled to uphold. She saw a reflection of her own pain in his eyes, a shared understanding of the burdens they both carried. "What will you do?" she asked, her voice softening, her concern genuine. He shrugged, a gesture of helplessness that surprised her.
"I do not know," he confessed.
"Perhaps find a place where I can live in peace, where I can forget the blood on my hands, the screams in my ears." He looked up at her, his gaze intense, searching. "I have seen too much death, Cecily," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "Too much suffering. I have caused too much suffering." Cecily reached out, her hand instinctively covering his, her touch gentle, reassuring.
"You were a soldier," she said.
"You did what you were told, what you believed was right." He shook his head, his gaze dropping to their joined hands. "Belief is a fragile thing," he said. "It can be twisted, manipulated, used to justify the most horrific acts." He looked up at her again, his eyes filled with a deep, profound sadness. "I envy you, Cecily," he said. "Your strength, your resilience, your ability to endure." His words surprised her. She had always seen herself as weak, as vulnerable, as a victim of circumstance. But he saw something else in her, something she had not recognized in herself. "I am not strong, Nicholas," she said, her voice trembling. "I am broken,
just as you are."
He tightened his grip on her hand, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. "Perhaps," he said, "but broken things can be mended. Broken pieces can be reforged." His words sparked a flicker of hope within her, a tiny ember in the darkness that had surrounded her. Could she be mended? Could she find a way to heal, to forgive herself, to move on? "Tell me," he said, his voice gentle, his gaze searching her face. "Tell me about your scars, Cecily.
The ones you hide so well."
His invitation, so unexpected, so vulnerable, opened a floodgate within her. She began to speak, haltingly at first, then with increasing fluency, pouring out the pain, the grief, the guilt that she had kept bottled up inside for so long. She spoke of her husband's death, of her betrayal by the king, of the burden of the secret she carried. He listened patiently, his gaze unwavering, his hand holding hers, offering a silent, steadfast support. He did not interrupt, did not judge, did not offer empty platitudes. He simply listened, and in his listening, she found a measure of release, a sense of catharsis she had not thought possible. As she spoke, he began to share his own scars, his own pain, his own regrets. He spoke of his childhood, of the harsh training he had endured, of the battles he had fought, of the lives he had taken. He spoke of the disillusionment he had felt, the growing awareness of the corruption and injustice that permeated the king's court. Their shared confessions, whispered in the dimly lit chamber, forged a bond between them, a connection that transcended their differences, their pasts, their stations in life. They were two wounded souls, finding solace in each other's pain, offering each other a glimpse of hope, a possibility of healing. The scars of the past, revealed and shared, became a bridge instead of a barrier. A foundation for something new, something fragile, yet undeniably powerful, began to form between them. The night was far from over, but a glimmer of light had pierced the darkness. Chapter 8. The Tournament of Lies. News of a grand tournament, hosted by a neighboring lord, Lord Ashworth, reached Ravensshire within days. It was ostensibly a celebration of peace and prosperity, but Cecily knew better. Tournaments were often used as a cover for political maneuvering, for secret meetings, for the forging of alliances, and the plotting of betrayals. And Lord Ashworth was known to be ambitious, a man who coveted power and was not afraid to use any means to achieve it. She had no desire to attend, to participate in the charade, to expose herself to the scrutiny of the court. But Sir Nicholas, surprisingly, urged her to go. "It is a chance," he said, his voice thoughtful. "A chance to observe, to learn, to see who your friends and enemies truly are." "And what if I have no friends?" Cecily asked, her voice tinged with bitterness. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. "Then you will make new ones," he said. "Or, perhaps, you will discover that you have more friends than you realize." His words, his confidence, gave her a measure of courage. She had been hiding in the shadows for too long, allowing fear to dictate her actions. Perhaps it was time to step back into the light, to face her enemies, to reclaim her place in the world. She agreed to attend, albeit reluctantly. Sir Nicholas insisted on accompanying her, not as her guard, but as her companion. It was a subtle distinction, but an important one. He was no longer in the king's service, no longer bound by duty or oath. He was there by his own choice, because he wanted to be with her. The tournament was a lavish affair, a spectacle of color and sound, of pageantry and pomp. Knights in shining armor, their horses adorned with rich trappings, paraded before the assembled crowd. Banners fluttered in the breeze, music filled the air, and the scent of roasted meat and spilled wine mingled with the sweat and dust of the arena. Cecily, dressed in a gown of deep blue velvet, her hair adorned with a simple silver circlet, watched the proceedings with a detached interest. She recognized many of the faces in the crowd, nobles and knights from across the kingdom, their expressions carefully masked, their true intentions hidden beneath a veneer of civility. Sir Nicholas stood beside her, his presence a silent reassurance. He was dressed in plain, dark clothing, his sword absent, his demeanor unassuming. Yet, she could sense the tension in his body, the alertness in his eyes. He was watching, assessing, gathering information, just as he had taught her to do. During a break in the jousting, Lord Ashworth approached them, his face beaming with a forced joviality. "Lady Cecily," he said, bowing low, "it is an honor to have you grace my humble tournament." Cecily inclined her head, her expression carefully neutral. "The honor is mine, Lord Ashworth." "And you, Sir Nicholas," Ashworth continued, turning to Nicholas, his smile tightening slightly. "I had not expected to see you here. I thought you were otherwise engaged." Nicholas met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "I am a free man now, Lord Ashworth," he said. "Free to choose my own company, my own path." Ashworth's smile faltered for a moment, then he recovered, his joviality returning, albeit with a hint of unease. "Indeed," he said. "Well, I trust you will both enjoy the festivities." He moved on, his gaze lingering on Cecily for a moment longer, a flicker of something that might have been calculation in his eyes. "He is up to something," Nicholas said quietly, as soon as Ashworth was out of earshot. Cecily nodded. "I agree. But what?" "I do not know," he admitted. "But I intend to find out." The tournament continued, the jousting becoming more intense, the rivalries more apparent. Cecily noticed subtle interactions, whispered conversations, fleeting glances that suggested a deeper game was being played beneath the surface of the spectacle. She saw Queen Isolde's cousin, Lord Valerius, the man named in the destroyed letter, deep in conversation with a group of known dissidents, their expressions conspiratorial. She saw Lord Ashworth meeting secretly with a representative of a neighboring kingdom, a kingdom known to be hostile to King Alaric. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, and the picture they formed was a disturbing one. A plot was brewing, a conspiracy that threatened not only the king, but the entire realm. And Cecily, unwittingly, was caught in the middle of it. The tournament of lies was revealing more than just skill at arms. It was exposing a web of deceit, with Cecily and Nicholas unexpectedly at its center. The festive atmosphere was a thin veil over a dangerous undercurrent, and the stakes were higher than ever. Chapter 9. A Dance of Deception. As the tournament progressed, Cecily found herself drawn into a dangerous dance of deception. She played the part of the gracious guest, smiling politely, exchanging pleasantries, all the while observing, listening, gathering information. She was learning to read the subtle cues, the unspoken messages, the hidden agendas that lurked beneath the surface of courtly behavior. Sir Nicholas was her guide, her mentor, teaching her the art of dissimulation, the skills of observation, the strategies of survival in this treacherous world. He moved through the crowd with an ease and confidence that belied his former status as an outsider. He had a knack for drawing people out, for gaining their confidence, for extracting information without them even realizing it. "Watch their eyes," he whispered to Cecily, as they observed a group of nobles engaged in animated conversation. "They betray their true feelings, even when their words do not." "Listen to the silences," he advised, as they eavesdropped on a seemingly innocuous exchange between two ladies-in-waiting. "What is not said is often more important than what is." "Trust no one," he warned, his gaze sweeping across the crowded arena. "Everyone has secrets. Everyone has something to hide." Cecily heeded his advice, learning to mask her own emotions, to control her reactions, to present a facade of calm indifference while her mind raced, analyzing, interpreting, piecing together the fragments of information she gleaned. She discovered that Lord Ashworth was not merely ambitious, he was actively plotting against the king. He had formed an alliance with Lord Valerius and several other disgruntled nobles, with the aim of overthrowing Alaric and placing a puppet ruler on the throne, one they could control. The neighboring kingdom, the one Ashworth had been seen meeting with, was providing financial and military support, eager to exploit the instability in Alaric's realm for their own gain. And Queen Isolde, though silenced, was not entirely out of the picture. Her loyalists, led by Lord Valerius, were working to secure her release, to restore her to power, to avenge her humiliation. Cecily realized that she was walking a tightrope, balanced precariously between opposing factions, each with their own deadly agenda. One wrong step, one misplaced word, could send her tumbling into the abyss. One evening, as the tournament was drawing to a close, Cecily found herself alone with Lord Ashworth in a secluded garden. He had lured her there with a pretext of discussing a trade agreement, but she knew his true intentions were far more sinister. "Lady Cecily," he said, his voice smooth and persuasive, "you are a woman of influence, of intelligence. You could be a valuable ally." Cecily met his gaze, her expression carefully neutral. "I am loyal to the king, Lord Ashworth." He smiled, a condescending smile that made her skin crawl. "Loyalty is a fluid concept, Lady Cecily. It can shift with the tides of power. My loyalty is unwavering," she insisted, her voice firm. He stepped closer, his gaze intense, his hand reaching out to touch her arm. "Perhaps," he said, his voice low and seductive, "you could be persuaded to reconsider." Cecily recoiled from his touch, her disgust evident. "I am not for sale, Lord Ashworth," she said, her voice cold. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury. "You are making a mistake, Lady Cecily," he said, his voice threatening. "A mistake you may live to regret." He turned and stalked away, leaving Cecily shaken but resolute. She had resisted his advances, rejected his offer, but she knew she had made a dangerous enemy. She sought out Sir Nicholas, finding him in the stables, tending to his horse. She recounted her encounter with Ashworth, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. He listened patiently, his expression grim.
"He is dangerous, Cecily," he said. "He will not give up easily."
"What should I do?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. He looked at her, his gaze filled with a mixture of concern and something else. Something warmer, deeper.
"We must expose him," he said.
"We must reveal his plot to the king. Before it is too late." The dance of deception was reaching its climax. Cecily, no longer a passive observer, was now an active participant, her choices carrying the weight of the kingdom's fate. The lines between ally and enemy blurred, and the next step could be her last. Chapter 10. The Serpent's Kiss. The final day of the tournament dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the dark undercurrents that flowed beneath the surface of the festivities. Cecily knew that this was the day they would make their move, the day they would expose Lord Ashworth's treachery to the king. But she also knew that it was a day fraught with danger, a day when everything could unravel. Sir Nicholas had devised a plan, a daring and risky gambit that relied on stealth, timing, and a healthy dose of luck. They would intercept a message, a secret communication between Lord Ashworth and his co-conspirators, a message that would provide irrefutable proof of their plot. The message was to be delivered during the final joust, a grand spectacle that would draw the attention of the entire court, providing a perfect cover for their clandestine operation. Cecily's role was to distract Lord Ashworth, to keep him occupied while Sir Nicholas intercepted the messenger. It was a role she played with a mixture of trepidation and determination. She approached Lord Ashworth, her expression carefully neutral, her demeanor polite but distant. "Lord Ashworth," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I've been thinking about your proposal. Perhaps I was too hasty in my judgment." His eyes lit up, a flicker of triumph in their depths. "Indeed, Lady Cecily, I am pleased to hear that you have reconsidered. I am a practical woman, Lord Ashworth," she continued, her voice smooth and persuasive. "I am always willing to explore all options." She allowed him to lead her to a secluded alcove, away from the prying eyes of the crowd. She engaged him in conversation, asking him subtle questions about his plans, his ambitions, drawing him out, playing on his vanity, his arrogance. She felt a sense of revulsion at his touch, at his veiled innuendos, but she maintained her composure, her facade of polite interest unwavering. She was playing a dangerous game, but she knew it was necessary, vital to the success of their plan. Meanwhile, Sir Nicholas, moving with the stealth and agility of a shadow, intercepted the messenger, a young page boy who had no idea of the importance of the message he carried. Nicholas relieved him of the scroll, replacing it with a blank parchment, before sending him on his way. The joust began, the clash of lances and the thunder of hooves filling the air. Cecily watched, her heart pounding in her chest, her gaze darting between Lord Ashworth and the arena, waiting for Sir Nicholas's signal. Finally it came, a subtle nod, a barely perceptible gesture, but enough to tell her that he had the message, that their plan was in motion. She excused herself from Lord Ashworth, her excuse flimsy but plausible, and hurried to the prearranged meeting place, a small, deserted chapel near the tournament grounds. Sir Nicholas was waiting for her, the scroll in his hand, his expression grim. "It is as we suspected," he said, his voice low. "Proof of their treason. Names, dates, plans, everything." Cecily felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed by a surge of adrenaline. They had done it. They had exposed the plot, secured the evidence they needed. But their victory was short-lived. As they were about to leave the chapel, they were confronted by Lord Valerius and a group of armed men, their faces contorted with rage. "You meddling fools," Valerius hissed, his hand on the hilt of his sword. "You think you can thwart us? You think you can escape justice?" Cecily and Sir Nicholas were trapped, surrounded, outnumbered. The serpent's kiss of betrayal had finally landed. Their carefully laid plan had been discovered, and their lives were now forfeit. The moment of truth had arrived, and it was far more deadly than they had anticipated. Chapter 11. Broken Vows. The small chapel, once a sanctuary, had become a cage. The flickering candlelight cast grotesque shadows on the faces of Lord Valerius and his men, their eyes burning with hatred and the thirst for revenge. Cecily stood shoulder to shoulder with Sir Nicholas, his presence a silent strength, but she knew their situation was dire.
Justice?
Nicholas scoffed, his voice laced with defiance.
You speak of justice, Valerius?
You, who murdered your king's own brother. You, who plotted to overthrow the crown.
Valerius sneered.
Lord Robert was a threat, a loose end that needed to be tied.
Just as you two are now.
You will not succeed, Cecily said, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the tremor in her heart. The king knows the truth. He will not allow this treachery to stand. Valerius laughed, a harsh, cruel sound that echoed through the chapel. The king? The king is a weak, foolish old man, easily manipulated. He will believe what we tell him. He will believe that you are the traitors. Cecily's blood ran cold. Valerius's words struck a chord of fear, a chilling realization that their carefully constructed plan could be turned against them. They had underestimated the Queen's loyalists, their reach, their influence. You have no proof, Nicholas said, his hand instinctively moving towards the hilt of his sword, though he knew it was a futile gesture. They were outnumbered, surrounded, with no escape.
Proof?
Valerius chuckled. We have all the proof we need. The word of loyal subjects against the word of a disgraced knight and a meddling widow. He gestured to his men, who are all former royal guards, deeply loyal to the late queen. They stepped forward, their swords drawn, their faces grim. Take them, Valerius ordered, and make sure they do not speak again. As the men advanced, Cecily closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. She had fought bravely, played her part, but it seemed that fate had other plans. She had risked everything, and now she was about to lose it all. Suddenly, a voice rang out, clear and commanding, cutting through the tense silence.
Hold.
The men hesitated, their swords poised in midair. Cecily's eyes snapped open, her heart leaping with a mixture of hope and disbelief. It was King Alaric, standing at the entrance to the chapel, his face a mask of fury. He was flanked by his own guards, their swords drawn, their expressions resolute.
What is the meaning of this?
The king demanded, his voice booming through the chapel. Valerius, momentarily stunned, stammered, Your Majesty, we were just silence. The king roared, I have heard enough. I have seen enough. He turned to Sir Nicholas, his gaze filled with a mixture of regret and gratitude. Sir Nicholas, he said, his voice softening slightly, you have served me well, better than I deserved. He then turned to Cecily, his gaze filled with admiration. Lady Cecily, he said, you have shown courage and loyalty beyond measure. You have saved the realm from a great peril. Cecily and Sir Nicholas exchanged a look of relief, of astonishment, of shared triumph. They had been saved, at the last possible moment, by the very man they had feared. The king turned his attention back to Valerius, his face hardening with fury. Lord Valerius, he said, his voice cold and deadly, you are accused of treason, of murder, of conspiracy against the crown. You will be held accountable for your crimes. Valerius, his face pale, his arrogance shattered, fell to his knees, begging for mercy. But the king was unmoved. He ordered his guards to seize Valerius and his men, to take them away, to imprison them, to await their trial. As the chapel emptied, leaving only Cecily, Sir Nicholas, and the king, Alaric turned to them, his expression weary but resolute. The queen's influence is broken, he stated. The whispers and poison ended. But at what cost? Cecily asked quietly. Some costs are necessary, Alaric stated, to preserve what matters. The king revealed he'd learned of Valerius' plans long before, using the tournament as his own trap. Sir Nicholas' seemingly broken vows of service had, in fact, been a carefully orchestrated ruse, directed by the king himself. Now the deception was over. The truth revealed. Broken vows had served a greater purpose, and the kingdom was safe, for now. The immediate danger had passed, but the repercussions of the day's events would linger. Chapter 12. The Lion's Roar. The aftermath of the tournament was a whirlwind of activity. Lord Valerius and his co-conspirators were swiftly tried and convicted, their sentences ranging from imprisonment to exile to execution, depending on the severity of their crimes. The kingdom breathed a collective sigh of relief, the threat of rebellion quelled, the king's authority restored. But for Cecily, the turmoil was far from over. She had played a pivotal role in uncovering the plot, in saving the realm, but her actions had come at a cost. She had made enemies, powerful enemies, who would not forget her betrayal. She had also exposed herself to the king's scrutiny, to his gratitude, but also to his expectations. King Alaric, deeply indebted to Cecily and Sir Nicholas, summoned them to court. He wanted to reward them, to publicly acknowledge their service, to demonstrate his appreciation. But Cecily had no desire for rewards, for accolades, for the trappings of power. She longed for peace, for quiet, for a return to the simple life she had once known. Sir Nicholas, however, saw things differently. He believed that they could use the king's gratitude to their advantage, to secure a better future for Ravensshire, for themselves. He urged Cecily to accept the king's offer, to embrace the opportunity to influence the court, to shape the future of the realm. "We have a chance, Cecily," he said, his voice earnest, persuasive. "A chance to make a difference, to create a better world, a world where justice prevails, where loyalty is rewarded, where the innocent are protected." Cecily hesitated, torn between her desire for peace and her sense of duty, her fear of the court and her longing to make a difference. She had seen the corruption, the injustice, the cruelty that permeated the king's world. Could she truly change things? Could she make a difference? She looked at Sir Nicholas, at his unwavering gaze, at the hope and determination in his eyes. She saw a reflection of her own aspirations, her own desire for a better world. And she realized that she could not do it alone. She needed him. She agreed to go to court, to accept the king's offer, but on her own terms. She would not be a pawn in his game, a puppet on his string. She would be a force for good, a voice for the voiceless, a champion of justice. The king received them with great fanfare, showering them with praise, with gifts, with promises of future rewards. He appointed Sir Nicholas to a position of high authority, making him his chief advisor, his right-hand man. He offered Cecily a seat on the royal council, a position of unprecedented power for a woman. Cecily accepted the offer, but with a caveat. She would serve on the council, but she would also retain her independence, her autonomy, her right to speak her mind, to challenge the king, to hold him accountable. The king, initially taken aback by her boldness, eventually acquiesced. He recognized her strength, her intelligence, her unwavering commitment to justice. He realized that she was not a woman to be trifled with, a woman to be controlled. She was a force to be reckoned with. And so, Cecily, the Lady of Ravensshire, the widow who had once lived in the shadows, stepped into the light, into the heart of power. She became a voice for reform, a champion of the oppressed, a thorn in the side of the corrupt and the powerful. She used her influence to advocate for fairer laws, for better treatment of the poor, for greater protection of the vulnerable. She challenged the king's policies when she believed they were unjust. She opposed his decisions when she felt they were wrong. She was a constant reminder that power came with responsibility, that authority must be tempered with compassion. She was a lioness, roaring her defiance in the halls of power. Her actions earned her the respect of many, the admiration of the common people, the hatred of those who benefited from the old ways. But she did not waver. She stood firm, guided by her conscience, by her sense of justice, by her unwavering commitment to creating a better world. The lion's roar echoed through the kingdom, a symbol of hope and change. And at her side, always, was Sir Nicholas, her protector, her advisor, her friend. Chapter 13. Flight into Darkness. Cecily's bold actions at court, her unwavering challenge to the established order, did not go unnoticed. While she garnered the respect of many, she also made powerful enemies, those who saw her reforms as a threat to their own power and privilege. Whispers of dissent grew louder, plots hatched in the shadows, and the threat of retaliation loomed large. One evening, as Cecily and Sir Nicholas were returning to their chambers after a particularly contentious council meeting, they were ambushed. A group of masked assailants, their faces hidden, their movements swift and deadly, attacked them in a dark corridor of the palace. The attack was sudden, brutal, and unexpected. Sir Nicholas, despite his skill and experience, was caught off guard. He fought bravely, defending Cecily with his life, but he was outnumbered, overwhelmed. Cecily, though unarmed, did not cower. She used her wits, her knowledge of the palace layout, to try to evade their attackers, to find a way to escape. But the corridor was a trap, a dead end, with no escape route. Sir Nicholas, wounded and bleeding, fell to his knees, his sword slipping from his grasp. The assailants closed in, their weapons raised, ready to deliver the final blow. Cecily, seeing her friend, her protector, about to be killed, screamed, a desperate, primal cry that echoed through the silent corridors. Her scream, miraculously, was heard. A group of guards, alerted by the commotion, came running, their swords drawn, their faces grim. The assailants, seeing their advantage lost, fled into the darkness, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. Sir Nicholas was alive, but barely. He had sustained multiple wounds, his body battered and broken. Cecily knelt beside him, her hands trembling, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and relief. "Nicholas," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Hold on. Please hold on." He looked at her, his eyes filled with pain, but also with a faint glimmer of love. "Cecily," he whispered, his voice weak. "You must go." "I will not leave you," she said, her voice firm. "They will come back," he gasped. "You are not safe here." He was right. The attack had been a clear message, a warning that her life was in danger. She could not stay at court, not anymore. She had to leave, to escape, to find a place of safety. With the help of the loyal guards, who had witnessed the attack and understood the danger, Cecily arranged for Sir Nicholas to be secretly moved to a safe location, a hidden monastery outside the city, where he could receive medical care and recover in peace. She then prepared for her own escape. She gathered a few essential belongings, a small bag of gold, a change of clothes, and a dagger for protection. She disguised herself as a simple traveler, her fine gown replaced by a rough woolen cloak, her hair hidden beneath a hood. Under the cover of darkness, she slipped out of the palace, unnoticed, unmissed. She fled into the night, leaving behind the world of power and intrigue, the world of danger and betrayal. She was alone, vulnerable, hunted, but she was also free. She rode through the night, her horse's hooves pounding on the dark road, the wind whipping at her face, the stars her only companions. She did not know where she was going, what the future held, but she knew she had to keep moving, to stay ahead of her pursuers, to survive. The flight into darkness was a desperate gamble, a leap of faith into the unknown. She had left everything behind, her position, her power, her friends, but she had also escaped with her life, with her freedom, with a flicker of hope that she might one day return, might one day reclaim what she had lost. But for now, survival was her only goal. Chapter 14. Sanctuary's Embrace. The road was long and arduous, fraught with danger and uncertainty. Cecily traveled by night, hiding by day, avoiding towns and villages, sticking to the less traveled paths, relying on her instincts and the kindness of strangers to survive. She ate sparingly, slept little, and constantly scanned her surroundings, alert for any sign of pursuit. The fear of discovery was a constant companion, a shadow that clung to her, a weight that pressed down on her. But she did not give up. She drew strength from the memory of Sir Nicholas, from his courage, his resilience, his unwavering belief in her. She clung to the hope that he was recovering, that he would be waiting for her, that they would one day be reunited. After several weeks of relentless travel, she reached her destination, remote, secluded monastery, nestled high in the mountains, far from the reach of the court, far from the eyes of her enemies. It was a place of peace, of contemplation, of sanctuary. The monastery was a simple, austere building, constructed of rough stone, its walls covered in ivy, its windows small and narrow. The monks who lived there were a quiet, devout order, dedicated to prayer, to study, to a life of simplicity and service. They welcomed Cecily, offering her shelter, food, and a place to rest. They did not ask her questions, did not pry into her past, did not judge her. They simply accepted her, offering her the unconditional acceptance and compassion she so desperately needed. Cecily spent her days in quiet contemplation, helping the monks with their chores, tending the gardens, assisting in the kitchen, finding solace in the simple rhythm of their lives. She found peace in the silence, in the beauty of the surrounding mountains, in the gentle routine of prayer and meditation. She began to heal, both physically and emotionally. The wounds of her past, the betrayals, the losses, the fears began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of calm, of acceptance, of inner strength. She learned from the monks, from their wisdom, their humility, their unwavering faith. She discovered a new perspective on life, a new understanding of herself, a new appreciation for the simple gifts of existence. One day, as she was working in the monastery garden, she saw a familiar figure approaching. It was a monk, dressed in the simple brown habit of the order, his face weathered, his eyes filled with a deep, profound peace. But she recognized him instantly. It was Sir Nicholas. He had recovered from his wounds, healed by the monk's care and by the restorative power of the sanctuary. He had chosen to stay, to join the order, to dedicate his life to a higher purpose. Cecily ran to him, her heart overflowing with joy, with relief, with love. They embraced, a long, silent embrace that spoke volumes, that transcended words, that sealed their bond forever. "Nicholas," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You are alive. You are well. And you are safe," he replied, his voice filled with tenderness. "You found your way here." "I did," she said, her eyes shining with tears. "I found my way home." They stayed at the monastery for many months, finding solace in each other's company, in the peace and tranquility of their surroundings. They had both been through so much, suffered so much, lost so much. But they had also found something precious, something enduring, a love that transcended the boundaries of their former lives, a love that was rooted in respect, in admiration, in shared experience. Sanctuary's embrace had healed them, transformed them, and given them a second chance at life, a second chance at love. The world outside remained turbulent, but within the monastery walls, they had found a haven, a place where they could finally be at peace. The darkness had led them to this light. Chapter 15. Echoes of War. Life within the monastery walls settled into a peaceful rhythm. Cecily and Nicholas found solace in the simple routines, the shared prayers, the quiet contemplation. They worked side by side in the gardens, their hands brushing occasionally, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. The unspoken love between them deepened, nurtured by the tranquility of their surroundings and the shared burdens they had carried. But the outside world, with its conflicts and turmoil, was not entirely forgotten. News, though infrequent and often delayed, filtered through to the remote sanctuary. Travelers, seeking shelter or spiritual guidance, brought tales of unrest, of shifting alliances, of the growing threat of war. King Alaric, despite his earlier reforms, had become increasingly isolated, surrounded by sycophants and self-serving advisors. The old corruptions were creeping back, the whispers of dissent growing louder. Lord Ashworth's allies, though scattered, had not been entirely silenced. They were regrouping, plotting, waiting for an opportunity to strike. One day, a weary messenger arrived at the monastery, bearing a sealed letter for Cecily. It was from Alara, her faithful lady-in-waiting, who had remained at Ravensshire, serving as Cecily's eyes and ears in the outside world. The letter contained disturbing news. The neighboring kingdom, emboldened by the instability in Alaric's realm, had launched an invasion. Ravensshire, situated on the border, was under attack. The castle was besieged, its defenses crumbling, its people in desperate need of help. Cecily's heart sank as she read Alara's desperate plea for assistance. She could not stand idly by while her people suffered, while her home was destroyed. She had a duty, a responsibility, to protect Ravensshire, to defend her people. She showed the letter to Nicholas, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I must go," she said, her voice firm. "I must return to Ravensshire." Nicholas nodded, his expression grim. He knew she was right. He could not ask her to stay, to abandon her duty, to betray her people. "I will go with you," he said, his voice resolute. Cecily hesitated. "But your vows," she said. "Your life here," he smiled, a gentle, loving smile that warmed her heart. "My vows are to serve," he said. "And my place is by your side." They prepared for their departure, gathering supplies, preparing their horses, saying farewell to the monks who had become their friends, their family. The monks offered them their blessings, their prayers, their support. As they rode away from the monastery, leaving behind the peace and tranquility they had found, Cecily felt a sense of trepidation, but also a sense of purpose. She was returning to a world of conflict, of danger, of uncertainty. But she was not alone. She had Nicholas by her side, her protector, her friend, her love. The echoes of war were calling them back, summoning them to a new battle, a new challenge. They were riding towards danger, towards uncertainty, but they were also riding towards their destiny, towards a future they would face together, united by their love, by their shared commitment to justice, by their unwavering loyalty to Ravensshire. The peaceful interlude was over. Duty called, and they would answer, together. Chapter 16. The Unveiling. The journey back to Ravensshire was fraught with peril. Cecily and Nicholas traveled in disguise, avoiding major roads and towns, relying on their wits and skills to evade detection. The land was ravaged by war, villages burned, fields deserted, the people scattered and fearful. The sight of the devastation, the suffering of the innocent, fueled their determination to reach Ravensshire and offer what help they could. They finally arrived at Ravensshire under the cover of darkness, slipping through the enemy lines with the help of a network of loyal peasants who still remembered Cecily's kindness and justice. The castle was under siege, its walls battered, its defenders exhausted, but still holding on, fighting with a desperate courage. Cecily's arrival was met with a mixture of joy and disbelief. Alara, her face pale and drawn with worry, embraced her mistress, tears streaming down her cheeks. "My lady," she cried, "you are alive. You have returned." The guards, seeing their lady return, their spirits lifted, their resolve strengthened. They had thought her lost, captured, or dead. Her presence was a beacon of hope, a symbol of defiance, a rallying cry in the face of overwhelming odds. Cecily immediately took charge, assessing the situation, organizing the defenses, rallying the troops. She was no longer the grieving widow, the hesitant participant in courtly intrigue. She was the lady of Ravensshire, a warrior, a leader, a protector of her people. Sir Nicholas, shedding his monk's disguise, donned his armor once more, his sword gleaming in the torchlight. He was a warrior again, a knight, his skills honed by years of battle, his courage fueled by his love for Cecily and his commitment to her cause. Together, they fought side by side, repelling the enemy attacks, inspiring their troops, holding the line against the relentless onslaught. Cecily, though not a warrior by training, proved to be a skilled strategist, her sharp mind devising tactics, her unwavering courage inspiring those around her. During a lull in the fighting, Cecily discovered a hidden passage, a secret tunnel that led from the castle to a nearby forest. It was a way out, a means of escape, but also a potential way to bring in reinforcements, to break the siege. She decided to use the tunnel to send a message to King Alaric, a desperate plea for help, a call for reinforcements. She entrusted the message to Alara, who, despite her fear, volunteered for the dangerous mission. Alara, guided by a loyal guard, slipped through the tunnel under the cover of darkness, making her way through enemy lines, risking her life to deliver the crucial message. Days turned into nights, the siege continuing, the fighting relentless. Cecily and Nicholas fought tirelessly, their bodies exhausted, their spirits weary, but their determination unwavering. They were fighting for their home, for their people, for their future. Then, one morning, as the sun rose over the besieged castle, a horn sounded in the distance. It was a familiar sound, a sound of hope, a sound of salvation. It was the king's army. Alaric had received Alara's message, and he had come, bringing with him a force strong enough to break the siege, to defeat the invaders. The battle that followed was fierce and bloody, but the tide had turned. The king's soldiers, inspired by the arrival of their monarch, fought with renewed vigor. The invaders, caught between the castle defenders and the king's army, were routed, their forces scattered, their leaders captured or killed. Ravensheim was saved. As the dust settled and the cheers of victory echoed through the battered castle, King Alaric approached Cecily and Sir Nicholas. He was older, wearier, but his eyes held a spark of the old fire, the old determination. He held out to Cecily a small, intricately carved wooden box. "Open it," he instructed, his voice raspy. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, dried rose, its petals brittle, its color long gone. But its scent was unmistakable. It was the scent of Queen Isolde's favorite perfume, a scent that had once permeated the royal court. Cecily gasped. "But how?" Alaric explained. Isolde hadn't simply been silenced. She'd been imprisoned, secretly, in a remote tower, her existence known only to a handful of trusted guards. The rose was proof, sent at Alaric's order. He had chosen mercy over vengeance, confinement over execution. But the secret had weighed heavily on him. The unveiling of this truth lifted a burden he had carried for years. The truth, long hidden, was finally revealed. The full scope of Alaric's actions, his complex motivations, his own internal struggles, were now laid bare. Chapter 17. A Knight's Confession. With Ravensheim safe and the invaders repelled, a sense of weary relief settled over the castle. The immediate threat was gone, but the scars of war remained, etched on the faces of the people, on the battered walls of the castle, and on the hearts of Cecily and Nicholas. King Alaric, acknowledging his past mistakes and the crucial role Cecily and Nicholas had played in saving the realm, offered them positions of power and influence. He wanted them back at court, to help him rebuild, to guide him, to ensure that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. But Cecily and Nicholas, having tasted the peace and simplicity of their life at the monastery, were reluctant to return to the world of courtly intrigue, of political maneuvering, of constant threat and betrayal. They had found something precious, something enduring, in their shared love, in their shared commitment to a life of service, and they were unwilling to risk losing it. They expressed their gratitude to the king, but respectfully declined his offer. They would remain at Ravensheim, they said, to rebuild their home, to care for their people, to live a life of quiet service, far from the temptations and dangers of the court. Alaric, though disappointed, understood their decision. He recognized their strength, their integrity, their unwavering commitment to their own values. He gave them his blessing, promising his continued support, his friendship, his gratitude. With the king's departure, Cecily and Nicholas finally had a moment to themselves, a chance to reflect on all that had happened, on the journey they had taken, on the future that lay before them. They stood together on the battlements of Ravensheim Castle, overlooking the land they had fought so hard to protect, the land they loved, the land that was their home. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, a scene of breathtaking beauty that mirrored the peace they had finally found. Nicholas turned to Cecily, his eyes filled with a love that had grown stronger, deeper, through all the trials and tribulations they had faced. He had never spoken of his feelings, never dared to express the depth of his emotion, bound by his duty, by his oath, by his own sense of unworthiness. But now, standing here, with the future stretching before them, with the past finally laid to rest, He could no longer hold back. He had to tell her, to confess the truth that had been burning in his heart for so long. "Cecily," he began, his voice hesitant, his gaze searching her face. "I have something to say to you. Something I should have said a long time ago." Cecily looked at him, her heart filled with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. She knew what he was going to say. She had sensed it, felt it, in his touch, in his gaze, in his unwavering support. But she needed to hear the words, to hear him speak the truth that had been unspoken for so long. "I love you, Cecily," he said, his voice low and earnest, his eyes filled with a tenderness that melted her heart. "I have loved you from the moment I first saw you, years ago, at that tournament. I loved you even when I was the king's falcon, when I was bound by duty, by oath, to a life I did not choose." Tears welled up in Cecily's eyes, tears of joy, of relief, of shared emotion. She had waited so long to hear those words, to know that her feelings were reciprocated, that the love she had hidden in her heart was not a foolish dream, but a reality. "And I love you, Nicholas," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "I have loved you since you came to Ravensshire, since you showed me kindness, compassion, understanding. Since you became my friend, my protector, my everything." He reached out, his hand gently cupping her face, his thumb wiping away the tears that streamed down her cheeks. "I know I am not worthy of you, Cecily," he said. "I am a broken man, a warrior with blood on my hands, a man with a past I can never escape." "You are worthy, Nicholas," she said, her voice firm. "You are the most honorable, the most courageous, the most compassionate man I know. Your past does not define you. Your heart does. And your heart is pure, your heart is kind, your heart is mine." He smiled, a radiant smile that lit up his face, a smile that chased away the shadows of the past, a smile that promised a future filled with love, with hope, with happiness. He leaned down and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that sealed their love, their commitment, their future together. It was a kiss that spoke of forgiveness, of healing, of second chances. It was a kiss that promised a lifetime of love, of companionship, of shared dreams. The knight's confession, long overdue, marked a new beginning. The warrior had found his peace, the lady her love, and Ravensshire its protectors. The sun set on their past, and a new dawn awaited. Chapter 18. The Heart's Rebellion. The news of Cecily and Nicholas's love spread quickly through Ravensshire, greeted with joy and celebration by the people who had witnessed their courage, their loyalty, their unwavering commitment to their land and its people. They were seen as a symbol of hope, of renewal, of a brighter future. But not everyone was pleased. News of their relationship and their refusal of the king's offer eventually reached the court, stirring up old resentments, rekindling old rivalries. There were those who saw their love as a betrayal, a defiance of the established order, a threat to their own power and influence. Whispers of disapproval, of condemnation, began to circulate. Some questioned Cecily's judgment, her decision to choose a former knight, a man with a tainted past, over a position of power and influence at court. Others questioned Nicholas's motives, suggesting that he had seduced Cecily, manipulated her, used her to gain his own freedom and escape his past. The pressure began to mount. Letters arrived from former allies, expressing their disappointment, their disapproval, their veiled threats. Emissaries from the court arrived at Ravensshire, urging Cecily and Nicholas to reconsider their decision, to return to court, to serve the realm in a more appropriate manner. Cecily and Nicholas tried to ignore the whispers, the pressure, the veiled threats. They focused on rebuilding Ravensshire, on caring for their people, on strengthening their defenses, on preparing for any future challenges. They found solace in their love, in their shared commitment to their values, in their determination to live a life of peace and service. But the pressure continued to escalate. Rumors spread of a plot to discredit them, to strip them of their titles, to seize their lands, to punish them for their defiance. The threat of betrayal, of violence, loomed large. One evening, as Cecily and Nicholas were walking through the castle gardens, enjoying a rare moment of peace and tranquility, they were confronted by a group of armed men, led by a nobleman Cecily recognized, Lord Astley, a long-time rival of her late husband, a man who had always coveted Ravenshire's lands and wealth. "Lady Cecily," Astley said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "Sir Nicholas, I have come to deliver a message from the concerned nobles of the realm." "What message?" Cecily asked, her voice cold, her hand instinctively moving towards the dagger she carried hidden beneath her cloak. "You have defied the king's wishes," Astley said, his gaze sweeping over them with disdain. "You have chosen a disgraced knight over your duty to the realm. You have brought shame upon your house, upon your name." "We have done nothing to be ashamed of," Nicholas said, his voice firm, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "You have chosen love over duty," Astley sneered. "A foolish, sentimental choice that will have consequences." "Love is not foolish," Cecily said, her voice trembling with anger. "It is the strongest force in the world. It is what gives us strength, courage, hope." "Love is a weakness," Astley retorted. "A vulnerability that will be exploited. And you, Lady Cecily, will pay the price for your weakness." He gestured to his men, who stepped forward, their swords drawn, their faces grim. "Seize them," he ordered. "Take them to the king. Let him decide their fate." Cecily and Nicholas were surrounded, outnumbered, their escape blocked. But they did not surrender. They stood together, back to back, their love their shield, their courage their weapon. The heart's rebellion, their defiance of the established order, had reached its climax. They were ready to fight, to defend their love, their freedom, their lives. Chapter 19. Trials of Loyalty. Cecily and Nicholas fought with the ferocity of cornered lions, their skills honed by years of experience, their courage fueled by their love for each other, and their determination to protect their freedom. But they were outnumbered, surrounded, and slowly, inevitably, they were being overwhelmed. Just as Astley's men were about to deliver the final blow, a horn blew, loud and clear, echoing through the castle grounds. It was the signal, the prearranged warning that meant reinforcements were coming. From the castle gates, a company of Ravensshire guards, led by Alara, charged into the garden, their swords drawn, their faces determined. They had been alerted to the danger, to Astley's treachery, and they had come to the rescue of their lady and her chosen knight. The tide of the battle turned. Astley's men, surprised and outnumbered, were quickly defeated, their leader captured, his plot foiled. Alara rushed to Cecily's side, her face filled with relief. "My lady," she cried, "are you all right?" "We are well, Alara," Cecily replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Thanks to you and your brave guards." Nicholas, his arm around Cecily, his gaze filled with gratitude, nodded to Alara. "You have saved us, Alara," he said. "You have proven your loyalty, your courage, your devotion." Astley, bruised and bleeding, was dragged before Cecily and Nicholas. He glared at them, his eyes filled with hatred and defiance. "You may have won this battle," he hissed, "but you will not win the war. The king will hear of this. He will punish you for your treachery." "We have committed no treachery," Cecily said, her voice cold and firm. "We have simply chosen to live our lives on our own terms, to love whom we choose, to serve our people in the way we see fit." "The king will not see it that way," Astley retorted. "He will see it as a defiance of his authority, a betrayal of your duty." "Then let him come," Nicholas said, his voice ringing with challenge. "We are not afraid of him. We are not afraid of anyone. We will defend our love, our freedom, our Ravensshire, to the death." Astley was imprisoned, his plot exposed, his allies scattered. But the threat remained. The whispers of disapproval, the pressure from the court, the danger of further attacks, continued to loom large. Cecily and Nicholas knew they could not stay at Ravensshire indefinitely. They were too vulnerable, too exposed. They needed to find a place of safety, a place where they could live in peace, away from the intrigues and dangers of the court. They decided to return to the monastery, to the sanctuary that had offered them shelter and healing in the past. It was a place of peace, of contemplation, of refuge from the storms of the world. They gathered their belongings, said farewell to their loyal people, and, under the cover of darkness, slipped away from Ravensheim, leaving behind their home, their land, their titles, but taking with them their love, their freedom, their hope for a better future. They were embarking on a new journey, a new adventure, a new life. They did not know what the future held, but they knew they would face it together, united by their love, by their shared values, by their unwavering commitment to each other. Their trials of loyalty were far from over, but they had found strength in each other. Chapter 20. The Dawn of Reckoning. The journey back to the monastery was a bittersweet one. Cecily and Nicholas were leaving behind everything they had known, everything they had fought for, but they were also moving towards a future of peace, of freedom, of love. They were escaping the dangers of the court, the pressures of their titles, the constant threat of betrayal, but they were also leaving behind their people, their home, their responsibilities. They arrived at the monastery, weary but resolute, seeking refuge once more in its quiet embrace. The monks welcomed them with open arms, offering them shelter, food, and the unconditional acceptance they so desperately needed.
But their peace was short-lived.
News of their departure from Ravensheim, of their abandonment of their duties, had reached the king. Alaric, swayed by the whispers of his advisors, by the pressure from the nobles who saw Cecily and Nicholas as a threat, had issued a decree. He had stripped them of their titles, declared them outlaws, and ordered their arrest. He had sent a company of soldiers, led by a knight Cecily knew well, Sir Gareth, a man who had once been Nicholas's friend, his comrade in arms, but who had now become his enemy, bound by duty, by oath, to serve the king. The soldiers arrived at the monastery, their armor gleaming in the sun, their faces grim, their purpose clear. They were there to capture Cecily and Nicholas, to bring them back to court, to face the king's justice. The monks, though peaceful and devout, refused to betray their guests. They stood in the way of the soldiers, forming a human shield, protecting Cecily and Nicholas with their bodies, with their faith, with their unwavering commitment to the principles of sanctuary. Sir Gareth, torn between his duty to the king and his respect for the monks, his former friendship with Nicholas, hesitated. He did not want to use force, to spill blood in this holy place, but he had his orders. Cecily and Nicholas, seeing the standoff, the potential for violence, decided to act. They could not allow the monks to be harmed, to be punished for their loyalty, for their kindness. They would face the king's justice, whatever the consequences. They stepped out of the monastery, unarmed, their heads held high, their love their only shield. They surrendered themselves to Sir Gareth, offering no resistance, accepting their fate with courage and dignity. Gareth, Nicholas said, his voice calm and steady, "We understand your duty. We will go with you peacefully. But we ask that you spare the monks. They have done nothing wrong." Gareth, his face etched with conflict, nodded. "I will see to it that they are unharmed, Nicholas," he said. "But I cannot promise you anything. The king's justice is harsh." Cecily and Nicholas were taken back to court, not as honored guests, but as prisoners, as outlaws, as enemies of the realm. They were brought before King Alaric, who sat on his throne, his face a mask of anger and disappointment. "You have defied me," the king said, his voice booming through the hall. "You have abandoned your duties, betrayed your titles, chosen love over loyalty. You have brought shame upon yourselves, upon the realm." "We have done what we believed was right, Your Majesty," Cecily said, her voice clear and strong. "We have chosen love, yes, but we have also chosen freedom, peace, and service to a higher power than any earthly king." "You are mistaken," the king retorted. "There is no higher power than the crown. And you will pay the price for your defiance." He sentenced them to imprisonment, to a life of confinement, stripped of their titles, their lands, their freedom. It was a harsh sentence, a cruel punishment, but Cecily and Nicholas accepted it with grace, with dignity, with unwavering love for each other. But as they were being led away, A commotion erupted at the entrance to the hall. A group of people, peasants, farmers, merchants, common folk from Ravenhire and beyond, had gathered, demanding to be heard. They were carrying banners, signs, protesting the king's decision, demanding justice for Cecily and Nicholas. Alara, who had rallied the people, stepped forward, her voice ringing with defiance. "Your Majesty," she said, "these people are not traitors. They are heroes. They saved Ravenshire. They protected the realm. They deserve your gratitude, not your punishment." The crowd roared its approval, their voices echoing through the hall, shaking the very foundations of the king's authority. Alaric, stunned by the outpouring of support for Cecily and Nicholas, by the sheer number of people who had come to their defense, realized he had made a mistake. He had been swayed by the whispers of his advisors, by the pressure from the nobles, by his own pride and anger. He had failed to see the truth, the loyalty, the love that Cecily and Nicholas inspired. He raised his hand, silencing the crowd. He looked at Cecily and Nicholas, his gaze softening, his expression filled with regret. "I have been wrong," he said, his voice low but clear. "I have misjudged you. I have allowed myself to be blinded by anger and pride." He reversed his decision, restoring their titles, their lands, their freedom. He apologized for his harshness, his injustice, his failure to recognize their true worth. The dawn of reckoning had arrived, not just for Cecily and Nicholas, but for the king himself. He had faced his own flaws, his own mistakes, and he had chosen a different path, a path of forgiveness, of reconciliation, of justice. The kingdom rejoiced, and a new era of peace and understanding began. Epilogue. The years that followed were a time of peace and prosperity for Ravenhire and for the realm. Cecily and Nicholas, restored to their titles and responsibilities, ruled wisely and justly, guided by their love for each other, by their commitment to their people, by the lessons they had learned through their trials and tribulations. They rebuilt Ravenshire, making it stronger, more resilient, more prosperous than ever before. They fostered trade, encouraged agriculture, supported the arts, and created a society where justice and compassion prevailed. They never forgot the monks who had sheltered them, the sanctuary that had offered them refuge. They supported the monastery, providing it with resources, with protection, with their unwavering gratitude. King Alaric, having learned from his mistakes, became a wiser, more just ruler. He listened to his people, heeded their concerns, and sought counsel from those who had proven their loyalty and wisdom, including Cecily and Nicholas. Alara, ever faithful, remained at Cecily's side, serving as her confidant, her advisor, her friend. She eventually found love herself, marrying a kind and honorable knight, and starting a family of her own. Cecily and Nicholas, though they never had children of their own, were surrounded by love, by family, by friends. They were revered by their people, respected by their peers, and admired by all who knew them. They grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year, their bond unbreakable, their commitment unwavering. They had faced countless challenges, overcome countless obstacles, but they had always done it together, united by their love, by their shared values, by their unwavering belief in each other. One evening, as the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape, Cecily and Nicholas stood together on the battlements of Ravenshire Castle, just as they had done so many years before, when their love was just beginning to blossom. They were old now, their hair silvered, their bodies frail, but their eyes still shone with the same love, the same passion, the same unwavering devotion that had sustained them through all the years. Nicholas reached out, his hand gently taking Cecily's, his touch still sending a shiver of warmth through her. "We have had a good life, Cecily," he said, his voice soft but clear. "We have," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "A life filled with love, with adventure, with challenges, but also with peace, with joy, with fulfillment. I would not trade it for anything," he said. "Not for all the riches in the world, not for all the power, not for all the glory." "Nor I," she said, her eyes meeting his, her love shining through. They stood there, hand in hand, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with vibrant colors, a final masterpiece of a life well lived, a love well cherished. They had found their peace, their happiness, their forever, in each other's arms, in the heart of Ravensshire, in the legacy they had created together. Their story, a testament to the enduring power of love, of courage, of loyalty, would be told for generations to come. And as darkness embraced, the stars appeared as silent witnesses, with the night whispering that some loves are eternal. The end.